All right, so we're going to be talking about writing an effective purchase agreement. And so I wanted to get into some tips and things to remember before we go through the actual agreement. The first thing to remember is that every purchase agreement is different. So you need to listen carefully to what your clients need and what needs to go into that agreement. Everything they want needs to be in writing. Don't rely on MLS or any kind of verbal promises of concessions. You need to get that in writing in the purchase agreement. Another thing that you need to make sure that you have in the agreement is their mortgage instrument. So if they're using FHA, VA, whatever, you need to make sure that's in there. A caveat, don't cross over into practicing law by writing lengthy phrases and descriptions. That's illegal for us to do. Instead, please go to the knowledge base and look up the phrase that you might need to put in there, or check in with your manager. Write a price in the contract that takes concessions into consideration. We'll talk a little bit more about this in our negotiating class, but make sure your buyer understands that if they're asking for 3, 6, 9% worth of concessions, that needs to be reflected in the total purchase price. So they can't just write what they think is a good offer and then subtract all that out. Make sure you have contingencies noted. If they have a home to sell, do not forget to put that in. That will be a scary process if we'll be talking to lawyers if that happens. And make sure you've asked for any and all concessions. If they need their closing costs paid for, be sure you write that in there. If they need the fee, make sure that's in there. Make sure you've constructed a good timeline for closing. So you'll need to work closely with the lender to figure out what that timeline might be. And have you requested the necessary inspections? I know the market's still tight in most places, and we're competing. There are multiple offers. I would highly recommend that you not forego any inspections to make your offer more attractive. Instead, you can shorten up the time frame or do other things, but please make sure you're protecting your buyer by asking for the necessary inspections. When you're explaining things to your client, you will need to explain the timeline for the whole process. And again, work with your lender to figure out what that timeline will be. Explain with them the importance of working closely with the lender and staying in communication. They need to know that when a lender asks for a document, they need it. If they don't get it, it's going to hold up the whole process. So kind of emphasize that importance. Share how the negotiating process works so that, you might go back and forth a couple times on it, arriving at the right price and terms. Ask them what they might not want you to share during this process. Sometimes they maybe are going through a difficult time. Maybe it's a divorce, or they're moving. Maybe they have something going on in their lives that they really would rather you not share. And really you shouldn't be sharing anything without their permission, but you may want to discuss that up front. You might also want to explain multiple offer tactics, like an appraisal gap or an escalation clause. So you'll need plan a lot of time to write the offer and really go through everything in detail. One area that agents seem to, every time I see the disciplinary actions from the state of Ohio, I see earnest money. Handling earnest money is something that gets people in trouble frequently. So when you're talking to your buyer, let them know that the earnest money will be collected and deposited. Sometimes they think that when you tell them it's going to be returned at closing, that means it's not going to be deposited. That maybe you're just going to ride around with the check in your glove compartment. But tell them it will be deposited. And don't write in the offer that you've collected it unless you have. I know a lot of times people write it in prematurely, thinking that they'll write it in, then they'll go collect it and get it deposited. Don't write it in until you have it in hand. Pro tip here, you may want to write in the offer that you will not collect it until after the inspections have been successfully negotiated. So that way you don't collect it and then negotiate, or the inspection doesn't go well and the deal falls apart, and now you got to figure out who gets the earnest money. So just write in that you're not going to collect it till after the inspection period is done. Keep a copy of everything. Put it all in dot loop. The copy of the check, copy of the title company receipt. Basically anything you get during the process of working with a client, you should put in dot loop. The state really loves a complete file, and so do we. Also, explain what happens if the deal should fall apart. They should just know about earnest money and that sort of thing. So just go over that with them. The next, I'm going to show the language that you might want to use to reject a co-broke. This will be on the screen. And if in your area they're still using co-brokes in the MLS, you may just want to reject the co-broke and go with what your buyer's agreement already says. So the language to write in a contract is simply this: buyer's brokerage is declining cooperating compensation as offered per multiple listing service. Seller to pay 3% buyer agency representation fee to buyer's brokerage at closing. So I said 3%, it may be 2, it may be whatever you ask, 2.5, maybe 5, I don't know. But whatever you've asked for in your buyer agreement, that's what you will write in the contract. If co-brokes have gone away and we're not doing that anymore, and you want to ask for it in the purchase contract, I know some of our purchase contracts are switching over to have that language already in there, but if yours still does not have it, you can simply write, seller agrees to pay buyer brokerage fee of X amount upon successful closing of property. So those will be on the screen for you, and if you need them, go ahead and jot them down. They're also in the knowledge base and on the resource page for all the changes. Just a few final thoughts on this. The purchase agreement is the ultimate tool to show our value. One thing I was taught early on in my career was to give a copy of the purchase agreement to the buyer when you first meet with them. That way they can look it over, they can get comfortable with it. If they have questions about any part of it, they can ask you. And it also shows our value, right? The contract's there not only to tell what we are agreeing to, but also to explain what happens when we don't agree, right? Now, if you read through that contract, the majority of it is what happens when we don't agree anymore. So that really kind of highlights our value when you can help them work through that process and explain some of it up front. So it's our job to help them during this time, and I think one of the best ways we can do that is to make sure we understand that contract inside and out, and we can explain it in clear and easy to understand terms.